This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
China's National People's Congress concludes today, bringing to a close the country's annual political season. The World Health Organization launches an independent financing body to address funding challenges. And we look at how an Ethiopian peacekeeper is inspiring women to take up all opportunities without fear. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. Nigeria may have recorded modest growth in the first quarter, but what lies ahead for Africa's biggest economy? And in sport, South African gymnast Caitlin Roskrans keeps her spirits high despite the postponement of the Olympic Games. We start in Beijing, where China's annual political meetings, the two sessions, are coming to a close. On Thursday morning, the National People's Congress met to review a government work report, an annual plan and a budget. Lawmakers also looked at the work reports of the Supreme People's Court and Supreme People's Procuratorate. Also on the agenda was a proposal to draft security legislation for the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. The NPC was scheduled to end its meeting Thursday. Premier Li Keqiang has met with the press. Well, for more on this now, we're joined by CGTN's Liu Yang in Beijing. Liu, as the two sessions closed this afternoon, what are some of the unique aspects you observed as a reporter during the two sessions?
I would say the technology, in particular the 5G technology, has been very convenient for all reporters. 5G plus 4K or even 8K technology guarantees the clarity of live video pictures. And we know in this year's government work report, Premier Li Keqiang also stressed the importance of the new technologies infrastructure and expanding the application of 5G to help industrial upgrading. And this is the first time that the new infrastructure has been mentioned in the government work report. Is also being considered as an important engine of China's future economic development. We know since the outbreak of the COVID-19, technologies such as 5G, big data, and AI have played an enormous role. Now we see the digital economy has sort of accelerated during the past few months, stabilizing investment and creating more jobs. And in April alone, the number of 5G customers increased by 7 million, and now the total number of users in China exceeds 36 million. We know that is this year no specific GDP target has been set. I think it is understandable that in the post-pandemic period, the priorities should be focused on improving the lives of nation's 1.4 billion people, protect the market entities, providing jobs, ensuring food supplies, energy and industrial chain security, expanding the domestic demand, and ensure the social stability. Of course, there are some targets that have been set, as mentioned in the government work report, including in creating over 9 million new jobs in the future and eliminating all poverty by the end of 2020. Meantime, China is planning to open up even more, expanding imports and shortening the negative list for foreign investment. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Liu Yang. They're telling us about some of the important priorities that China has made mention of during this political season. Well, let's take a look now at a reaction to all of this from Africa. Let's start in South Africa, where a scholar has called on Africans to pay attention to the outcomes of China's two sessions. Dr. David Monyai, who is the director of the Center for Africa and China Studies at the University of Johannesburg, says Africa stands to benefit from China's political and development plans. He says the continent will be the biggest beneficiary of the Belt and Road Initiative.
I think a lot of work is being put into rural e-commerce to ensure that the products from agriculture from some of the poorest people in China finds its way into the mainstream economy And I think that in itself, it is quite an innovative way where Africa and other regions in the world need to learn to ensure that you balance your big economy, big companies, as well as with ordinary people where there's massive poverty.
Now, trade and investment ties between China and Africa have grown from strength to strength over the past few years, benefiting all parties in the process. And that's resulted in African economies growing significantly and leading to the creation of millions of jobs across the continent. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with more.
It's been more than a decade now since China became Africa's #1 trading partner. And over the years, this partnership has resulted in the development of the continent and that of China too. The African Union says the China-Africa Trade and Investment Partnership is going in the right direction.
Over the years of this closer coming together, there has been a large inflow of investment and there has been very large trade exchanges between the two parties. And China has emerged as one of Africa's most strategic sources of both imports as well as exports, and with that also investment. And that is moving in the right direction.
Chinese investment in Africa's textile, manufacturing, horticulture and food export sectors has resulted in millions of jobs on the continent. These state-of-the-art Ethiopian industrial parks serve as a good example. Millions make a living here. China's indirect investment in Africa was $110 billion in 2019. Last year, China's trade with Africa grew 2.2%, and Africa's export to China is expected to rise in leaps and bounds in the years to come too.
China is a large developing country. China does not consider itself as a developed country, yes. And certainly it is also a process of promoting South-South cooperation, which is cooperation among developing countries. So that is also moving in the direction. And through that, we are also building confidence in an interdependence among countries.
Africa now wants its private sector to contribute more too. This, coupled with Chinese continued investment, it is hoped will result in a better Africa. Commissioner Mtongana has called on the African private sector to aggressively invest in the continent.
You have the resources to invest in Africa. Some of your resources are held abroad and they are earning negative interest rates. This is the time to bring the resources to Africa. Have confidence in Africa. Invest in Africa. You have the capacity to regenerate the African economy.
Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, African economies are already suffering. Even raw material exports have been adversely affected. The continent now is banking on the African Continental Free Trade Area and its partnership with countries like China for its revival. Grumjara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, achieving a moderately prosperous society is an issue that has featured prominently in China's 2 sessions this year. A Nigerian scholar, Dr. Sharif Ibrahim, has praised China for its successful poverty eradication strategies. He says China will be able to accomplish its development goal despite the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic.
China is resilient, and China goes by action, not by words. Whatever China says, it is actually committed to achieve that. China will be able to achieve this particular plan, even if we're going to have challenges. COVID-19 has posed a great threat to the global economy, and China has been able to quickly, respond to that and return into normalcy. Production plants and companies to actually resume, production. So I think with this particular inertia, an instrument, it will be able to achieve the fight, on poverty and lifting people out of that menace.
Well, China has been continually supporting African nations as they fight COVID-19. CGTN's Gurum Chalo once again takes a closer look at China's medical efforts on the continent.
China has been at the forefront of offering assistance to African countries during the coronavirus pandemic. Beijing dispatched medical teams including to Ethiopia, Burkina Faso, Algeria, Zimbabwe and the DRC.
Now that the virus is spreading like a wildfire across different parts of the world, including in Africa, China in turn is demonstrating its solidarity with Africa. The support mobilized by the Chinese government and the private sector, including the Jack Ma Foundation, to assist the COVID-19 response efforts in Africa is very much appreciated. China's willingness to share its successful experience by deploying medical teams is also commendable.
The specialists were from different fields including infectious disease, intensive care, traditional Chinese medicine and public health. Many were on the front lines fighting the coronavirus back in China. On top of their anti-epidemic experience, the medical teams brought with them much-needed medical supplies, including ventilators, personal protective equipment, and reagent testing kits.
Through these donations, we really managed to cover some of the gaps we have in Africa, especially in the area of testing and having testing kits and medical commodities that's needed in Africa, because all of us, we know that it's not being manufactured here. We have very low local manufacturing for these products.
And it's not just efforts by the Chinese government. Chinese billionaire Jack Ma's foundation has donated thousands of tons of medical supplies to the continent, with Ethiopia coordinating the distribution to all 54 African countries.
Africa is battling the coronavirus not as 54 but as one. The coordination of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and the Jack Ma Foundation has resulted in 3 important rounds of medical supplies to the continent.
The World Health Organization estimated that Africa has a deficit of around 1.8 million health workers. To battle the global coronavirus pandemic, Chinese President Xi Jinping said a top priority was to build capacity in African countries. President Xi has pledged $2 billion over 2 years to help countries fight COVID-19.
It is our belief that we want to build a community of shared future for mankind. So we have a big vision here. And as a follow-up, my president has announced $2 billion in the next 2 years in the fight against COVID-19. And the money will go mostly to the developing countries, and I believe African countries. So if the vaccine is made available in China, we will make it a global public good.
The news that comes out of China guaranteeing Beijing's continued support to Africa for its coronavirus battle is always a great news. This is especially vital now. Studies indicate that a minimum of $44 billion will be required for emergency health care as the continent confronts the COVID-19 pandemic. Grumjara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
The World Health Organization has launched a foundation to act as an alternative financing body. It is an independent grant dispersing body that seeks to support the UN body's public health mandate. It will provide funds to trusted partners to deliver identified goals. WHO's Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus says the foundation will go a long way in helping to achieve global health targets.
It's well documented that one of the greatest threats to WHO success is the fact that less than 20% of our budget comes in the form of flexible assess contribution from member states, while more than 80% is voluntary contributions from member states and other donors, which are usually tightly earmarked for specific programs. In effect, that means WHO has little discretion over the way it spends its funds, almost 80% of its funds.
The foundation will work with individual major donors, with the general public, and with corporate partners to strengthen the global health ecosystem by supporting WHO's resource mobilization strategy, broaden WHO's donor base, and supporting its 5-year strategy.
Well, turning to the COVID-19 pandemic, Tedros added the human cost of the viral outbreak is devastating to the world. But he also said the pandemic has given the world a glimpse of how things could be if measures to curb climate change and air pollution are implemented.
The human cost of COVID-19 has been devastating, and the so-called lockdown measures have turned lives upside down. But the pandemic has given us a glimpse of what our world could look like if we took the bold steps that are needed to curb climate change and air pollution. Our air and water can be cleaner, our streets can be quieter and safer, and many of us have found new ways to work while spending more time with our families.
Well, Tanzanians can now evaluate whether they have COVID-19 symptoms with a home screening tool. The AI-based app called Corona Check can be downloaded free of cost. CGTN's Daniel Kijo has more.
One of Tanzania's biggest health providers is turning to technology to help in the fight against the coronavirus. Aga Khan Hospital has developed Corona Check, an AI app designed to help Tanzanians self-diagnose. The app has been developed by the Digital Resource Center of the Aga Khan Development Network as an effort to support the government's effort to reduce the spread of the disease.
Through artificial intelligence, which is a technology that you use, it can actually respond to your queries, questions, and you get to understand whether you're symptomatic or not.
According to Aga Khan Hospital, 19% of users required immediate testing and medical assistance. The system works like a digital questionnaire. Users answer questions, and it works out if you might have the virus based on the data input. But it faces challenges, as it has no way of giving a diagnosis for asymptomatic users, because all the inputs would indicate a negative answer. Developers say the Corona Check app can lead to a decrease in the number of visits to health facilities. This can ensure that critical resources such as testing kits and health workers' time are allocated and directed to those most in need. Since the pandemic hit Tanzania about 2 months ago, the government has closed schools, asked citizens to sanitize, wear masks, and avoid large crowds. Despite the numbers of cases going down, President Magufuli says the crisis is far from over.
We must be clear that corona is still here. All Tanzanians must continue taking precautionary measures. Cases have gone down, yes, but still we must be careful.
The Corona Check app also seeks to tackle myths and misconceptions by featuring educational videos to combat the increasing amount of unverified information circulating on social media platforms. Unlike contact tracing apps available in other countries, this app does not require personal data, hence removing most privacy issues. The team says the response has been positive so far.
This is a significant impression that the impact is actually very good and it's going to be very helpful.
It's not clear how many Tanzanians will download and use the app for COVID-19 information. But with the outbreak possibly lasting for months, officials at Aga Khan say having the more tools to combat this global challenge, the better. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Well, let's take a short break. Your business news coming up next. Nigeria may have recorded modest growth in the first quarter, but what lies ahead for Africa's biggest economy? And Africa still an attractive investment destination despite the coronavirus pandemic.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now, the launch of an historic SpaceX rocket ship was called off with less than 17 minutes to launch due to lightning in the sky. The spacecraft was set to blast off on Wednesday afternoon for the International Space Station. It would have ushered in a new era in commercial spaceflight and also put NASA back in the business of launching astronauts from the US for the first time in nearly a decade. Ever since the space shuttle fleet was retired in 2011, NASA has relied on Russian rockets to carry astronauts to and from the space station. Liftoff has been rescheduled for Saturday. NASA pushed ahead with the preparations despite the coronavirus outbreak, but it did keep the guest list at the Kennedy Space Center extremely limited and asked spectators to stay at home. The space agency estimated 1.7 million people were watching the launch preparations online. Now, staff at grounded South African Airways will soon know their fate as business rescue practitioners prepare to submit their recommendations for the future of the airline. SAA entered a local form of bankruptcy protection in December in a last-ditch effort to either save or liquidate the national carrier, which has not turned a profit since 2011. CGTN's Angela Coppola has more.
CGTN has been reliably informed that the long-delayed business rescue plan will be submitted to Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan on Friday. This was the deadline agreed to between the parties after a parliamentary committee meeting several weeks ago. In the meantime, the business rescue practitioners, or BRPs as they are known in South Africa, got permission to appeal a Labour court decision to block retrenchments. The unions, of course, are really tight-lipped about this latest legal move. On Tuesday, the BRPs reached out to all interested parties and creditors via an email, describing in detail what had been spent since the process began. This after the Public Enterprises Minister demanded an accounting of money spent. According to the document, their monthly operating costs amounted to around $111 million, which was a saving of about $27 million, they say, compared to what was spent by management prior to the voluntary business rescue starting. Everyone is now waiting to see the plan and government and unions' response to it. This as the country enters level 3 lockdown on June 1, which offers the prospect of domestic flights resuming. According to the practitioners, there's still a reasonable prospect of rescuing SAA, provided there's complete commitment and the funding is in place. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, despite many challenges, Africa remains a good investment destination. The continent is poised for growth, both in population and resources, and China continues to see this potential. The Asian giant has invested heavily in developing countries in Africa. CGTN's Sumitra Naidu has more.
Infrastructure remains one of the biggest challenges facing countries in Africa. Limited power supply has become a barrier to economic growth and poverty reduction on the continent.
I think for Africa to achieve its Agenda 2063, it requires more energy. And energy needs to be planned not just for now. All African countries need to plan energy for the next 10 to 50 years, ensure that it goes with economic growth as well as population.
According to global data, there's 242 power projects in development across Africa. These projects have a total investment value of over $313 billion. China has invested in more than half of these projects.
This continent is a place where Chinese companies can
compete with global companies, where they can get that international exposure, where they can help secure energy supply for China, and diversify the resources that China needs, but also to get involved across the value chain.
The African Development Bank says the continent's infrastructure needs are estimated at between $130 and $170 billion, providing further investment opportunities.
We are aware of energy plans that are ongoing in Zimbabwe with its own economic challenges. I think there's an upgrade of Kariba and energy in that country. And then Zambia has had quite a number of energy projects that are online, done by the China and Zambian government.
While infrastructure development is growing in Africa, South Africa is stalling. Corruption and mismanagement has left the only power supplier in the country with mounting debt and eroding infrastructure.
China is the country that has the financial and technical expertise to help South Africa realize a just energy transition. There is the question of how we transition away from coal to other sources of energy, how we protect those jobs. Very centralized mode of production, where Eskom is responsible for pretty much everything, is probably not going to work anymore.
Many are still waiting to see the plan to save Eskom. In the meantime, load shedding will be reintroduced in the coming weeks as we head into winter. For those businesses that are reopening since the lockdown, it's another expense that they cannot afford. Many experts believe it's time that South Africa open up this industry to new players. Sumitra Naidu, CGT in Johannesburg, South Africa.
The movement and equipment of material needed by healthcare workers has been a top priority for many governments. They rely heavily on logistics and freight businesses to get what's needed to those on the front line. But that has been a challenge due to travel restrictions imposed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's CGTN's Angela Coppola with more.
The global air freight business is struggling, mainly due to the cancellation of many passenger flights to Africa. And that's because the air freight business depends on passenger flights for freight movement.
It's really a sort of a crisis in terms of capacity for air freight movement and ocean freight movement, simply because the capacity has shrunk to almost 60 to 65% in Africa today. And when you look at it globally, we are talking about almost 30 to 35% capacity shortage. And it's really hurting everybody who wants to move goods from China mainly to this continent.
The country's ports were also a challenge, especially with air freight being limited.
The huge backlogs at the ports within South Africa obviously created a lot of delays for our clients and business generally, and then trying to find solutions to move cargo. The ports could only handle a certain amount, so that was pretty difficult.
Like all businesses operating in the pandemic, the logistics sector operators have had to adapt in order to survive. Many companies have gone digital with their administration systems.
Saludo is a digitalized platform which is actually making it easy to sit at home, book your cargo. It's like connecting the buyers and the transport community at large to maximize the space and reduce waste. And this is also making it much more easy for all our customers and ourselves.
The way we do business definitely impacted. From going a face-to-face business, sitting in front of customers, talking on the phone often, to suddenly not having that anymore was a complete different change. The IT setup had to change overnight.
They talk about the free flow of traffic between different countries and neighboring countries. Here at the border between Botswana and South Africa, there's a 2.5 to 3 kilometer long queue of commercial vehicles trying to get into Botswana and not making any progress.
You've got these vehicles sitting there, costs, the escalation of costs that need to be passed on at this time just creates havoc within the industry. But I think also the ability to service these countries is going to become more and more critical.
The land and sea-based freight and logistics industries have been the lifeblood of many continental economies, as most airlines have been grounded. That's set to continue for some time. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, in other business news, China says it will do its utmost to keep its economic growth stable while ensuring that all measures taken are well calibrated. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang said this during a press conference after the conclusion of the annual national legislative season. The country reserves policy space, said Li Keqiang, on the fiscal, financial, social security and other fronts, and is in a strong position to quickly introduce new measures should the situation call for it without any hesitation. Keqiang Ali added that it is essential to keep China's economic development on a steady course. He said keeping China's economic fundamentals stable in itself will be a contribution to the whole world, and China will remain a positive force driving global economic recovery and growth. He says China will be able to fulfill the tasks and goals for the whole year and complete the building of a moderately prosperous society in all respects. Now, with the coronavirus pandemic still ravaging parts of the world, Nigeria faces a very tough year ahead. Oil prices have slumped and the country's economy is taking a serious beating. First quarter GDP for this year grew by just 1.87%. Right, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Coming up, we look at how an Ethiopian peacekeeper is inspiring women to take up all kinds of opportunities without fear.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now, working as a peacekeeper can be a dangerous occupation, but one Ethiopian blue helmet is finding purpose in her work as an auto mechanic for the UN mission in South Sudan. CGTN's Asta Tal tells us more.
With her tools in hand, Sergeant Desta gets to work. The 26-year-old fixes and maintains around 4 vehicles a day. These vehicles are used by the UN mission in South Sudan to patrol the region and protect vulnerable citizens.
It touches my heart to realize how beautiful South Sudan and its people are. They treat me as their friend, daughter, and family. It feels like my second home.
Before her deployment to South Sudan, she spent 6 years in the Ethiopian army.
I joined the military because it's a noble profession which I always wanted to do. Auto mechanics is what I enjoy, keeping vehicles running.
Her work ensures that peacekeepers are able to continue doing their job. But home is never far away from Sergeant Desta's mind as the world tackles the COVID-19 pandemic.
Being away from my family in a time of such a worldwide health crisis is worrisome. In all my daily communication with my family back home, I share health tips on what they should do to protect themselves to stay safe from the pandemic.
Despite this, she continues to work, determined to inspire other women to join her profession. Asta Tal, CGTN.
And heading to Zimbabwe now, rural women of Wedza district are enjoying a new form of mobility, motorcycles powered by solar-charged lithium batteries. As Mohammed Abubakar reports, the motorcycles are leased to the women by a local startup.
In the rural villages of Wedza district in Zimbabwe, women are going hamba. Hamba in the local Shona language means to go. Here, it comes in the form and shape of these electric rickshaws, which are powered by solar-charged lithium batteries. They are leased to individuals or a group of up to 5 women who share it in their day-to-day chores. For local health worker Lindy Mtongana, the arrival of Humber bikes is a blessing.
This Humber motorcycle has made it easier for me to ferry patients to and from the hospital. We now have fewer cases of pregnant women giving birth at home due to the lack of transport to the clinic, as was the case before.
The name Humber was given to this project that is being piloted by a startup called Mobility Africa. It targets to better the economic situation of rural women whose daily chores involve moving heavy loads.
Women in the rural areas carry the burden of carrying firewood, going to fetch water to drink, and carrying school kids to the school. So as Mobility for Africa, we saw that we need to lessen the burden on women. So we needed to test with the women so that we can see if they can be able to do some productive work during the time by saving time and saving their income.
We used to carry firewood on our heads for a very long distance of about 2 kilometers. But now it's much easier as this tricycle has taken away that burden.
These women pay $15 per month, which is shared. They also pay up to $1 to have their batteries charged at a solar power station. However, the company is also selling the bikes to any willing buyer for a cost of $1,500.
The project is targeted to rural women and many other service providers. So we have noticed that it's not everyone who can afford to buy it. So we are going to sell it to those who can afford to buy it, but at the same time we will continue leasing, because those rural women, what should their future look like if we just take our Humbers and then start selling them?
Women who lease the motorcycles are allowed to move with the bikes within a range of 100-kilometer radius. Humber is locally assembled with parts imported from China. The current pilot project is in its second phase, and if proved to be successful, it will be rolled out across Zimbabwe and the neighboring countries. Mohamed Abubakar, CGTN.
Coming up in your sports news, up next. South African gymnast Caitlin Rooskrantz keeps her spirits high despite the postponement of the Olympic Games.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Olympic athletes from around the world have put their dreams on hold for the time being after the Tokyo 2020 Games were postponed to next year. CGTN's Julie Shire caught up with Caitlin Rooskrantz, the first South African gymnast to qualify for the Games in over a decade.
South African gymnast Caitlin Rooskrantz made history last year when her bar routine won gold at the World Challenge Cup. She had her heart set on an Olympic debut this year, but sadly, it was not meant to be.
2020 Tokyo Olympics was where I wanted to be, and then you qualify for it and you work, you kind of plan your whole life around it, shift everything. I moved my studies a year later, and all to, try and benefit me doing well at this Olympics, and then it gets postponed, so it was a big shock to me.
Caitlin has kept her spirits up by training at home, but she's worried the Johannesburg Gymnastics Club won't survive the lockdown.
It is a small business, and relies a lot on the income of all, the gymnasts that go there. So with, the results of this pandemic and a lot of parents losing their jobs, therefore not being able to send their kids to JGC anymore, now we've taken a big hit. I still need a facility to be able to train in, to be able to get to the Olympics. Not only that, but a lot of my teammates are actually still trying to go for one more spot.
Her club started a 100-day handstand challenge on social media. All it takes is some bravery and a few clicks to donate on the club's Back a Buddy page.
It doesn't have to be an amazing handstand. We've had a few parents doing it. You can do it up against a wall. So any place where, you're able to kind of do a handstand, you take a picture of yourself or a video, you upload it on social media, and then you kind of tag other people to do it. Hashtag keep us standing, and then tag a company or someone which you would like to sponsor your handstand. And then that person can go to the link and then they can donate as much as they would like.
The initiative has so far raised $3,000 of its $5,000 target. It will help cover coaches' salaries and keep the gym afloat for 3 months. But it will also keep the Olympic dream alive for the African champion and many other youngsters. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's go to the Kenyan lakeside city of Kisumu, where fitness fanatics have turned a flyover on a busy motorway into a training facility. It's their innovative way of keeping in shape during the COVID-19 lockdown. CGTN's Mohammed Abubakar brings us their story.
It is one of Kenya's busiest motorway flyovers, which cuts through Kisumu near Lake Victoria. The Kenyan government closed gyms and all other sports training facilities in March as part of measures to contain the spread of the coronavirus. This is Evelyn Akinyi, a welterweight boxer and a member of the national team. The 27-year-old says she is convinced that staying physically fit will help her and others fight off the virus.
I'll keep training because I still have a lot to achieve. People should not fear corona because when you train, your immunity builds and cannot be attacked easily by illnesses.
Vincent Ochieng trains here with his daughter Stacy. He is due to compete for Kenya at the Wuxi 2020 World Taekwondo World Cup Championships in China.
This year we were planning, and that's why I'm training here. That's why I'm here today. We are planning to represent our country in October. That's in China World Cup, Taekwondo World Cup. But unfortunately, this COVID-19, we don't know itaisha lini. We are just praying and hoping itaisha before that time.
The early morning training sessions are attracting hundreds of residents in Kisumu, including footballers, fitness enthusiasts, and even dancers.
The exercise is helpful, as you can see in the European countries. In London, for instance, Arsenal's head coach and other players in the team fell sick of coronavirus, and they recovered very quickly because of exercise and without taking any drugs. They stuck with physical exercises, and now they are back together as a team.
The Kenyan government continues to ask people to avoid gathering in groups, but residents here say they have no choice but to come here in the open because they have nowhere else to train. Mohammed Abubakar, CGTN.
Well, that's where we leave it for this edition of Africa Live. Remember to send your feedback to the contacts on your screen and follow us on social media. I'm Lindy Mtongana. That's all from me this afternoon. Thank you so much for watching from me and the team here in Nairobi. Thanks and goodbye.